We're now live on YouTube with the October 22nd, 2018 joint JSF and Node.js. With the October 22nd. And I did the classic thing where I did not close the window with the stream, so we got some feedback there. So we're joined by 22 participants today who are going to be discussing the intent to merge the JS and Node Foundation. We've got a whole bunch of people from different organizations. So kind of kicking it off, we do have an agenda, but before so, I think it might be good to do some really quick introductions. So if people could do elevator pitches of themselves, I'll name you, and then if you can unmute yourself and just quickly introduce yourself and your name, where you work, what project you work on. And I think that's enough for right now. First, we have Michael Dawson.
I'm Michael Dawson. I'm IBM's community lead for Node.js on the technical steering committee and the community committee, and active in a bunch of the working groups as well.
Next, we have Manil.
Hey, I'm Manil, member of the ComCom, active in a bunch of groups, and I'm here in that capacity.
Excellent, thank you. Next, we have Andrew Updegrove. In case Andrew's having problems with his mic, Andrew is the attorney for the Node.js Foundation.
Sorry, back on again.
Next, we have Ben Mitchell.
Hi there, Ben Mitchell, developer advocate at Envision. I work on various working groups inside ComCom. It's great to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. Then we have Charlie Robbins.
Hey folks, how's it going? I am the Gold Director on the Node.js Foundation Board of Directors, and I'm here in that capacity.
We have Christian Broman.
Hi, this is Christian from Sauce Labs. I'm the maintainer of the WebDAO project in the JS Foundation.
Thank you. We have ComCom, who I believe is Adam.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. I'll change that name. Yeah, my name is Adam Miller. I'm a do design systems at LinkedIn, and I'm here in the capacity of ComCom chairperson.
We have Dan Applequist.
Hi there. I'm Dan Applequist. I work for Samsung. I'm the director of open source group and web advocacy for Samsung Research UK, and I'm the Node. I'm sorry, I'm not the Node anything. I'm the JS Foundation board member for Samsung.
Wonderful, thank you. We have Gaurav Seth. Gaurav, if you could quickly introduce yourself by just stating your name, where you work, and your relationship to the projects.
Yeah, hi, my name is Gaurav Seth. I work at Microsoft and represent Microsoft as a board on the Node.js board.
Thank you, Gaurav. We have James Snell.
Hey, I'm James Snell, Node.js Nearform.
We have Joe Seppi.
Hey, Joe Seppi here from IBM, open source engineer, and I'm here in the capacity of being a ComCom member.
Jory Burson.
Hello, Jory Burson here from the JS Foundation Technical Architecture Committee representing Boku.
Awesome. Matteo Collina.
Hi, I'm Matteo Collina from Italy, also from Nearform, and I'm a member of the Node.js TSC.
Thank you, Matteo. Richard Gibson.
Yes, I'm a maintainer of many JS Foundation projects and the technical lead for Sizzle.
Thank you very much. We have Ryan Block.
Hey, I'm co-founder of Begin and one of the maintainers of JSF Architect.
Awesome. Sam Ruby.
Hi, I'm Sam Ruby. I work for IBM. I'm a fairly new collaborator.
Thank you, Sam. We have Samuel Gordolina.
My name is Samuel Gordolina. I work at Gixter, and I've been involved with the Node.js localization for Portuguese.
Thank you. We have Stephen Ayer.
Hey, I'm Steve. I'm legal counsel to the JS Foundation.
Thank you, Stephen. We have Thomas Watson.
Hello, I'm Thomas Watson. I work for Elastic and I'm on the diagnostics working group on the Node Foundation.
We've got Zibby Keaton. Zibby, you're currently muted if you're trying to talk. Zibby does marketing for both the Node.js Foundation and the JS Foundation and works for the LF. If their mic starts working later, they can add some more if I made any mistakes. And last we have Ziran Sun.
Ziran is on my, this is Dan. Ziran is on my team in Open Source Group UK and is on the TAC group within JS Foundation. I'm not sure. She might be having trouble getting unmuted.
Excellent. So coming back to where we started here, we have a rough agenda for today. For those of you who are on the call, if we go to the Node.js/bootstrap/issues number 14, which I'll drop in the chat right now, that issue has an agenda. It also has a doc that it links to for the minutes. If you could add your name to the agenda, as you can see, I am doing in real time while speaking to you all. I'll drop the agenda link in there as well. And is there anyone on the call who can volunteer to take notes during this meeting?
I'll do my best, but it's probably good to have a few people doing it.
I would appreciate if somebody could add my name to that list. I'm not able to do it right this moment. I'm on the phone.
I think we got the names taken care of. Michael Dawson's going to get started with the notes, but as people heard, please just, help out with the notes if you can. The more people we have on there, the better our note taking can be. So we have about 47 minutes left on the meeting and about 15 minutes of agenda plan. So let's just kick right off into it. Our first issue that we have is issue number 9, guiding principles, concerns, and general operations. I believe that this is something that was created by James Snell. It includes references to a vision and mission PR that I opened. How do we govern this group was another issue that's part of this. Initial mission statement drafts and for governance discussion, which I believe was part of this as well as our first pass of the bootstrap process. So I believe between all these issues, one was opened by me, one was opened by Adam. James, do you want to lead this discussion or would you like someone else to take that off your hands?
I'm not sure if there's too much to lead. I mean, we need some bootstrap language around this. We've had there's a couple of PRs that kind of start heading that direction. We need to figure out which is the right starting place. That's it.
Okay, so I mean, I can kick off one of the things that I know we definitely have been discussing right now, which is membership. How does membership of this group get determined? Who can participate? Is that something that anyone has any opinions on?
The draft that I wrote basically says anyone who has any commit rights or contributor rights to any of the Node or JS Foundation projects can be a member. And would automatically be assumed to be a member unless they explicitly opt out.
Yeah, I can give some historical context as to conversations I've heard kicking around in multiple different places. There was one suggestion for anybody with a commit bit, which seems to be the most popular at the moment. There were suggestions for anybody from TAC, TSC, and ComCom are like official members, but it's open engagement, it's allowed to contribute. And there are others floating around that were slightly more restrictive, but they didn't get much traction. I'm personally on, we're talking about opinions, anybody with a commit bit to any Node or JSF repo, project repo sounds reasonable to me. But there's a larger question for the hierarchy here, like in issue number 7, or sorry, PR number 7, it popped up. Who runs these meetings? Who organizes the agenda? like who's it's largely a service job, making sure that these things run smoothly. But that is an additional question that comes up when you start talking about membership. There's also a third question in this conversation. If anything ever needs to come to a vote for whatever reason, what is the voting body and how does that operate? So that's kind of the broad overview of what this discussion should probably entail.
It's not clear to me what the difference between membership and voting. Like, I guess I was assuming that if you're a member, that means you can vote. Otherwise, like, anybody's free to participate, right?
So I guess maybe that's a good first question to ask. Should there ever be voting in this group?
I don't believe so, unless this group is specifically being asked to make final decisions. As understanding it, this group was formed to make recommendations. So if that's the scope of it, then I don't think voting is necessary.
I would agree.
Yeah, I agree. This is Dan. I agree with that. So in terms of participation in the group, I agree with the basic idea that it should be anybody with who's participating in the projects. I would enlarge that to include the board. I think if we, since the boards and the TAC committee and stuff like that, ideally those people should also be people that are participating in the projects. But in some cases, board members are not going to be people that are participating in the projects. So, and I think we want to have this be a forum that has those voices in it as well.
Perhaps this is something that we can reach a light consensus on right now. This meeting had an invited list that included Node.js members, JSF project maintainers, JSF TAC, Node.js Foundation Board of Directors, and the JSF Board of Directors. Is there anyone on this call who has an objection to any of those groups that were invited to participate in this meeting as being people who are participating in this bootstrap process? So without hearing any objections, I think it seems reasonable to just move forward with that list. Can
I just ask you to repeat it for a second so I get it in the notes?
Yeah, it's here. I'll copy paste it into the chat so you can then copy paste it into the notes.
Okay.
For those who are joining the call from the JSF, can you imagine people who would not be clarified as JSF project maintainers who should be included? Or is that satisfactory to the group that you think should be included?
I think it's on us to reach out specifically to project leads and figure out if a lead isn't available to participate, if perhaps somebody else from their project would like to come and represent a point of view. And that's something I think we at the JSF need to be more explicitly recruiting for.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, excellent.
I just have one other quick question. Like, if somebody else who was not in one of these groups wanted to be involved, what would we do in that case?
I would be curious what their interest, if they weren't a contributor to Node or a contributor to a JS Foundation project, I would be curious what their interest in participating was, like how they wanted to perhaps assist the process. If it's because, they're evaluating joining the foundation, or if it's because they have some specific skills that could be of benefit to the process. I think those are really valid reasons, but I think we want to be cautious that it's not too we're not just inviting looky-loos, which is a funny word.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty clear. I was just curious, like, because most of our projects and teams and stuff in the project, we're always like, yeah, anybody who wants to come and participate. So we need to just be.
Yeah. I'd like to actually ask a clarifying question. When we talk about membership, what are the implied benefits? Because typically membership implies, like currently membership of a top level committee in Node implies you have voting permissions. Otherwise meetings are open attendance, like open for people to listen in and contribute back, and the repos are all open. So when we say membership, what are we talking about here?
Adam, I can clarify my thoughts on that. I think it's a combination of A, the ability to attend and participate in the meetings, and B, having commit and access rights to the Bootstrap repo.
Cool. I'm okay with that as long as it's well defined.
And I guess if we're reaching consensus on things, being an active participant in the consensus seeking process. So number 2, we had the issue open, and it's like, so the first question is, do we have a team in GitHub? I don't know that we necessarily need a team in GitHub for this, but is this something that we can just give individuals access to the repo, or should we make a Node.js Bootstrap team? We can kick that back to GitHub, but that's something to chime in on in number 2. There was a thing about request to join, but I don't think that you need to request. This is kind of people get grandfathered in. Membership requirements. That's not something that we have right now, but since it's such a broad group, I don't think that that's necessarily something we need to dig into. One that I do know we need to discuss is how often and when do we meet? This time was suggested by the board because it was something that we already had in many calendars, and it was a time that we can run with. But I know that the Node.js Foundation's strategic outreach, one of the ComCom initiatives, has a meeting bi-weekly at this time as well. Does this current time work for people, or should we look at a different time? Alternatively, for those who are in the meeting that's normally at this time, do you see any problems with changing the meeting time?
I don't have any problem changing that, but I guess we should talk to Dan, who's been the chair. I think you did, right? Did he give you any feedback?
Dan seemed open to moving it, but just it seemed like consensus needed to be reached at the group.
So my constraint is I'm based in the UK. So this meeting is already, it's been going on. We've been having this time slot for the joint board discussions. I've already had a weekly meeting at 7 p.m. my time for a number of months. I'm happy to continue to do that. Moving it later would be not very nice. So that's my concern. And there you are. Sorry. Also, because I asked Saran to also join this call, we have 2 people from Europe. I mean, we may have more people coming in from Europe. I think having it be at a time that makes sense for Europe and the US would be best.
Okay. One thing that we have done in our technical steering committee meetings is we actually have 3 rotating times to allow more flexibility for people who are outside of a main time zone. And if we want to help to avoid rescheduling the other meeting, we could offer this meeting bi-weekly with an earlier time slot on the alternating week.
I think that's fine. If that happens, if we end up changing the meeting time for each thing, then somebody's going to be in charge of sending out meeting invites and making sure that those are up to date with the right, like maintaining a CAL feed basically that people can subscribe to. That would be my suggestion, because otherwise people get really confused about when the meetings are going to be. So yeah, we do that in the tag. We do exactly what you just said in the tag group that I chair in W3C, where we have people from around the world in that, and we need to make it work for people in Japan and California and Europe.
Okay, so let's kick that one back to GitHub and explore alternating meeting times, since that would be potentially less controversial for the other meeting as it is. The last thing that we don't have consensus on that I wanted to bring up was like, what's the process to landing changes to the Bootstrap repo? Does anybody have anything to add regarding consensus around landing things to that repo?
What's the disagreement at this point? I don't think
that there are any disagreements. It's more like, when could things land? When should things land? When do we consider it to be consensus that changes can land within that repo? So for example, the Node.js main repo, I think, has either 48 or 72 hours for a change, and as long as there's no objections, it can land. Whereas alternatively, like the modules team that we run, because it's such a large group on a contentious topic, we require pull requests to have consensus in a meeting with quorum. Which, might I add, we don't really have quorum rules for this group, so I'm unsure how we really know that we have consensus on things when it's such a large group and we don't have specific quorum rules.
Yeah, I guess I'd be in favor of some amount of time or something like that, as opposed to needing a large number, because like you said, with this big a group, that's going to be next to impossible.
Yeah, Jory has a question in the chat about clarifying what landing means.
Right. Not clear to me if that means like, oh, we're landing this and a decision has been made, so we're considering this like ready for the next step, we're going to move on from it, or if it means like, just here's an idea that the group is going to keep kicking around. I just don't know what it means.
I think that that's something that also needs to be defined, likely in the README, as to like what the artifacts inside of the repo represent and mean. Are they all potential ideas, which is probably better with such a large group, or is it like the things that we have consensus on? So that's something that we can kick back, but something that's probably good to document in a pull request.
I mean, I think we're going to have lots of discussion and proposals, and then at some point, I assume we need to make some recommendations. So if we separated those two out, you know, a recommendation might be, okay, we've actually agreed on a recommendation we'd make, and everything else would be, this is a proposal, or, you know, for discussion, continues to be under revision until we actually decide to promote to a recommendation.
Yeah, so taking a step back and looking at what deliverables are expected of this group might help us determine how to best go about pulling stuff into this repo. Miles, I like the idea of considering just about everything in this repository a working document. Like none of this should be or will be gospel until something actually gets approved by the boards and until we actually start operating as a new entity. To my understanding, there are two major types of deliverables we have here. One is recommendations, drafts, ideas for charters and bylaws. So top-level committee charters for CPC and C3, to use acronyms that were made up at the governance sessions. And then also bylaws, recommendations, and draft language for board. That's one type of deliverable. Second type is program ideas for actually day-to-day governance of how this thing will operate moving forward. That would include things like you know, the ticket submission program, like what the CNCF has, or how projects move through the graduation flow and through different sections of the project. So can anybody, is there another type of deliverable that's expected of us other than governance documents and charter and bylaw recommendations?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but we're actually hitting the time box on this particular topic. Would anyone like to extend the time box on this topic, or should we move on to the next topic?
I would like to add some distinction to what we consider landing in the repo just before we move on. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
The reason I want to add to that is because with the way this group is, this repo brings, this Bootstrap committee brings together a bunch of people who may have different ways of how we organize. So Node.js may have a certain process that's different from JS Foundation. So the distinction I'd like to make is that when we land something, it would save us the confusion of whether or not that document is not necessarily final, but that is something on which we intend to continue building rather than this is something still being actively deliberated. That way, when we make a PR and something is being discussed in the PR, and then when it finally lands, we know that the next step would be to continue building on top of that. And if more discussion needs to be had, we would have that in the format of a pull request or opening an issue. But yes, this document, this repo holds works in progress, and eventually at some point we may agree that, okay, now it's complete enough to make submissions. Maybe periodically, maybe at one go at the very end. I'm not sure yet.
I think that that's something we can kick off down in YouTube, down in GitHub. One thing I was thinking that we definitely could do is, you know, if we make folders where we can land documents where it's like the names of the people who are supplying it or the groups that are proposing it, rather than it being kind of a top level thing, we could use that as a way of kind of keeping history of the things that are being said and who brought it. Jory, you're mentioning the staging process from TC39. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just it comes to mind that we could borrow like the kind of thinking around staging items as being stage 0. It's just like a, you know, spaghetti on the wall idea to, you know, stage however many stages we want to have, where the final stage is like, we've really reached consensus on this and that's something that we want to merge in.
Jory, would you like to maybe take a action item of proposing that process on the repo?
I would be happy to.
Wonderful, thank you. We've now gone over the time box by 3 minutes. Do we want to continue on this topic, or are we good to move on to the next one? I will take the silence as moving on. The next topic that we have here is number 5, which was an issue that was opened about the JS Foundation. I believe this was opened by Christopher Hiller, who's on the call. Christopher, would you want to lead the discussion here?
Is Chris on the
sorry.
call? Oh, there he is.
I am on the
Great.
call, but no, go ahead with. I didn't have anything really prepared, so that was just kind of a collection of thoughts. So.
Okay, so I guess one thing I can do to kind of kick it off here, you know, I think that in this thread, a few things that were brought up were like inconsistencies between the Node Foundation as well as the JS Foundation, and just kind of like the process that's going on. Perhaps we do not need all the time that was assigned to this in the time box, but for those from the JS Foundation, you know, I think this could be a good opportunity to talk about your role in the process, how you see things going right now, things that we could be doing to work together better, or things you like or dislike, just kind of an opportunity for the JS Foundation to be the focus of the conversation for the moment. And if that's not useful, we can easily move on. We have lots of stuff to talk about.
I'm not so sure we need like a boatload of time for this. I do really appreciate it that we're making this part of the discussion, because I think the JS Foundation and its related projects, even in aggregate, are fairly dwarfed by the size and the activity of the Node community. And so we really do appreciate the fact that the Node community is very interested in hearing our concerns. And it does seem like we have a lot of related concerns, specifically like in information flow between our boards and our projects. And I think both sides, Node and JSF, would do well to really like work on that as a core problem. I don't think I really would have anything else to add about that just at the moment, but you know, we'll keep trying to kind of whip interest in our, to borrow that term from politics, in this from our our projects and continue to sort of bring lessons learned from not just the JS Foundation, but in the Dojo Foundation and the jQuery Foundation before that, and all of the iterations this has been.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jory. So with that being said, I think we can wrap this one up early, unless I'll give one more chance for anyone else to chime in if anyone else had something to bring up regarding the JS Foundation.
Hey, Miles, it's Brian speaking here. Just very, very quickly, I wanted to chime in from the perspective of the ARC project. We really like the way that JS Foundation allowed member projects to have some control over our destiny as far as governance goes. And in general, I'd say I'm pretty excited about this merger. It brings together a lot of resources that didn't need to be separate. It makes things a little more inclusive. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I really like how this has started off. I think it's on a good foot.
Thank you very much, Brian.
So yay us is all I'm saying.
Woo. Excellent. So with that being said, let's move forward into, we have a 5-minute time box right now around seek to understand and resolve differences in foundation bylaws. Sam Ruby, that was your issue. Would you like to lead the discussion?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to talk about. Basically, I looked at both the bylaws, looked at them line by line. They're a lot more similar than they are different. I found section by section, I summarized the differences, and then I opened up another issue with a higher level description of what I thought was the important differences. I think the main thing we got to resolve right now is what's the process for landing? What's the process for making a proposal? I think we're starting to have some good discussion with Matteo and myself, and possibly with Jory, trying to figure out how to collaborate, what we should do in terms of things like who can be members of the board or directors. But I think the major issue that's blocking it at the moment is trying to figure out what the process is for making a proposal.
So Sam, this is Sarah Novotny. I don't think we've met. I'm one of the board members on the Node.js board. And I would say at this point, we don't have a process for making a proposal. So my recommendation would be that you identify, as you've done, the spaces where you have differences, and then say, we like it more like this, or we may like it more like that, picking, one side or another, or recommending a particular alternate path if there's a third path that you would recommend, but not spending a lot of time trying to actually make it bylaws language, because we have lawyers for that. And honestly, as long as we have a direction set for where we want to go and what the preferred outcome is, we can do the finessing with people who will make it meet the needs of law. So. Yeah,
I don't know if you know me. I mean, I've been around for many, many years. I've worked with lots of lawyers. I do know how to start that process. In other words, I don't think we should dive into the weeds and try to pick out exact language, but I do think actually trying to sketch out in more detail than just setting off some directions to our lawyers and having them come back and pester you with 1,000 questions, that's not a path to success.
Absolutely. But that's why I was saying where you saw the differences, just say, just being able to identify, we prefer the way the JSF did this, or we'd like to do it roughly like what the Node Foundation did, but, slightly to the left, that kind of thing.
I did create an issue suggesting after looking at all of them, starting with the JSF is probably a better starting point, given that this JSF is a collection of projects and the Node.js Foundation is a foundation centered around a project and 2 others, but
right, with others bolted on.
Yes. So just that was a better starting point. There's a number of key differences. One of the first obvious key differences is that the Node.js Foundation allows non-corporate members on the board of directors. And so Matteo spun off a separate issue on that. We're starting to make progress on that. I don't think we'd be producing any final language, but actually trying to decide, for example, the ratio of corporate members to non-corporate members as a draft proposal and whatever is actually the type of work we're doing. And I think that's useful. No, I don't think we'd be proposing actual text that lawyers would have to take at verbatim, because obviously they never would.
Yeah, it's just a waste of time for everybody, sadly. But that's awesome that you've started that work. And I did take a peek at the issue probably a week and a half ago, right after the Collaborator Summit. I haven't looked at it since. As I mentioned to Miles earlier, GitHub is not my native language. So when I go look at, somebody commenting on somebody else's something, I'm just like, my head hurts. Can you guys?
Well, most of my work was early last week, where again, I went line by line through the two bylaws. I actually did diffs and actually posted all my intermediate steps in the final work.
Awesome.
And a separate issue saying, let's start from the JSF and work the following changes as issues.
Awesome.
And of that, Matteo spun off the first issue, and I think today we've made some progress on that.
Cool.
Yeah. Something I wanted to add to that conversation, it was mostly about the board representation. There was a proposal that had been put together in the past that I think may be worth dusting off and revisiting. I can send it to you. But it was essentially about taking the board representation that we have and not having it in the bylaws that they're assigned to specific entities, and rather allowing the top level projects to assign them on a yearly basis and use a Condorcet type model for assigning the seats. I think that falls somewhat in line with what you were suggesting, but we can kick that back to GitHub for the implementation details.
Okay, but still there would be some reserved for corporates and some not, or totally project done?
Oh, so this was specifically just for the non-corporate membership. So
Okay.
I think the idea was to maintain the representation proportions that we have right now, which I think is 25% of the board, but that like those specific seats would no longer be like specifically identified. I'll dig up the old proposal and I'll send it your way.
Yeah, that sounds roughly where I'm at. I proposed single transferable vote, but you might have an alternate proposal. Work through that.
Yep. Excellent.
I think, Sam, was it one of the key things, in terms of you're saying how to make a proposal, is it around the earlier discussion of like what's a draft or not, so that we can actually get things landed and make it easier for people to collaborate on? Or
yeah, I mean,
different?
I would like to see something landed. I don't mind it being marked as a straw man or proposal. It's certainly not stage 3 TC39 quality. But at that point, we could talk about having pull requests on specific parts of the individual sections.
Because I think we found that makes it a lot easier once people can pull request. Otherwise, you get a really long discussion that's very hard to follow.
Yeah, that's my experience.
So with that being said, and I think this is a really great segue into the next agenda item, which we have 15 minutes for, which was to discuss the deliverable that was requested by the board. Some context for those who were not at the Collaborator Summit, and hopefully I do a better job of giving context this time. At the end of the last board meeting, the board was trying to think about ways in which we can move the process forward. And specifically, the bylaws of the foundation itself are going to be one of the core things that needs to be augmented first, even before we figure out the exacts of the governance of the whole foundation. And for any other legal paperwork or any sort of basically anything to move forward, those differences in the bylaws need to be figured out first. So what was requested initially was a proposal that I had put by the board, which was, hey, maybe by the end of October, the project can get together a list of requirements for what the foundation must absolutely have, and that the board could come back by Thanksgiving in November, American Thanksgiving, with suggestions as to what the bylaws could look like. Some of the feedback that we did initially receive about that was related to it feeling a little bit like a black box, feeling like we're sending things back and forth and not collaborating as much. That's part of the reason why we have this joint meeting today with representatives from both boards and both foundations. But I do think that it would be good to try to stick to the to the goals that we set forth here of having something for the end of this month that we can share. Tracy had opened issue number 6, which was around creating expectations. And it has a list of stuff. I can read it off really quickly. With the intent of the merge, the Node.js Foundation and the JS Foundation being announced, I was interested in the continued support of Node.js and JS-related projects are working through expectations and structure for what the potential new foundation could look like. This document is for an initial phase work for the Bootstrap team to draft requirements that overlap the scope of the board in order to provide an outline and structure for the foundation attuned to the needs of the project and ecosystem stakeholders who have participated. And the list is as such: communicated scope for the foundation and board, annual reviews of staff, NPS, board programs, support services to projects for accountability and incremental improvement. The foundation staff, executive director, and board should follow a servant leadership style. Project representatives on the board. Projects could have tiers. Only platinum projects could sit on the board directly. Community representatives on the board, 1 seat guarantee. There's like 4 different potential proposals for how that could work. But the key bit being that there needs to be community representation on the board. That non-corporate member representation in budget and finance committee must be able to happen. The project values should drive foundation focus and priority. That there be no pay-to-play technical participation. Earmarking allowed with flexibility and budgeting for concerns and needs in individual projects, and value satisfaction, regular feedback from projects. So this is a really rough list. It, needs a little bit, more polish, obviously, from us, and we need to have consensus around it. But I think that's context to kick off this conversation about, like, A, are we comfortable with moving forward with putting together some sort of document? B, what should that document look like? And C, what should the contents of it be? And Jory has their hand up, so Jory, please take it from here.
Yeah, so last week I spent some time looking at all of Sam's great work, as well as Tracy's expectations and all of the output that Adam shared from the Collaborator Summit. And I started to sort of see the 2 separate things kind of emerging. One is like, what are our requirements for the bylaws of the new foundation, which should really just be the legal entity, the tax status, like its bare minimum viable operations, like what does that look like? And then what are our community expectations for our policy requirements, which certainly have more to do with that sort of like servant leadership style, cultural things, policies that we might want to change and iterate over time on a more regular basis. So I didn't really know how to proceed with those thoughts from there, given that I wasn't sure exactly how to interact with the repo. But I thought that might be like a good distinction to make as we proceed. What are we discussing that is like core to the legal structure here, and what is it that we're expecting to change and emerge as a result of new projects or changing, priorities or things like that?
Yeah, and that's kind of the distinction that I was getting at a little earlier too. There's those 2 very distinct deliverables, and the process might be different for them. So I am somewhat at a loss at how the bylaws work will be done. But the programs, at least, there's a PR with the RFC process for how to do that. And Joy, I'd love if we could layer on a staged proposal process onto something similar.
This is Andy Eptigrove. It might be useful if I give you a little bit of observations on the legal side about maybe what should go where. Would that be helpful? Well, let me assume it will be.
Yep.
The good news is that both of the sets of bylaws are based on the same model. So working, across them will be relatively easy because they both came from the same template. The second thing to keep in mind is that a good deal of what you see in the bylaws basically is right out of the statute. So with respect to wording, a lot of the sections, the language is kind of the way it should stay. If you look at something and it looks like boilerplate, it's probably right out of the statute. And, unless there's something you really object to in it, I would have a bias towards leaving it. The sections that do properly merit a lot of attention that don't just jump out of the statute are things like composition of the board, composition of committees, and what sorts of votes it might take to approve certain things. Those tend to be, and what it would take to amend the bylaws. So there's a fairly short list of things that tend to be the variables from one set of bylaws to another, with a lot of the rest of it being stuff that you're kind of stuck with because it comes right out of the Delaware statute. The next thing I would observe is that the bylaws tend to be, I'm sorry, and I should add into that the different classes of members and what rights each class of members should have, and who gets on the board and how they get on the board. Another observation would be is that generally it makes sense to look at the bylaws as corporate governance, and everything having to do with the technical process as living outside of the bylaws in charters. And one reason is because that you have whatever flexibility you want in the charters because they don't come out of the statute. So worry about how a committee gets created and what the charter for the committee is, what its purpose is, but everything else about how it operates, I would put that in the charter rather than start putting things into the bylaws that weren't there before. From a process point of view, the easiest thing I think to get to the end is to pick one of the sets of bylaws, whether it's Node.js or JS Foundation, and look for what you want to change. From a process point of view, that's the simplest way to go about it. And then if you just give, the legal side of things, a set of bullets of what you want to change, then we can make the changes in ways that, if you will, are still in the same language as the statute. So that would be my, suggestion. Obviously, you can do things differently, but I think from an orientation and from a efficiency point of view, that might be a good way to look at it.
So I'm going to ask two questions. I guess I better propose two possible ways forward and see what people think. I guess Sam did a lot of amazing work to compare the two, and I resonate strongly with the idea that we want to get something in there that people can PR individual changes against, so that the conversation threads are a bit more split up. One possible way to move forward would be to just to add the JSF current bylaws in there and let people comment individually on different sections. An alternative, though, Andrew, I think a lot of us are, you mentioned that there's some stuff that is set in stone, basically just has to be like that because it's in the Delaware statute. There's other stuff that we have wiggle room on. And I think we might have some trouble identifying where the fill in the blank sections are in these types of documents. So getting a list, rather than just saying, what are your recommendations, getting a list of questions that we need a community answer for might be helpful. So we're less focused on the whole document and more on just the places where we actually have control to customize.
I agree. That would make a lot of sense. And if it would be helpful to you, I could highlight what I would consider the boilerplate stuff, if that would be useful to you.
That would be wonderful. And Sam actually just called out in the chat here. He says, likely the places where the bylaws differ are the places where we have control. So that'd be cool if there was good overlap there.
That's a good observation. That's likely to be quite accurate.
I think we could do that by, with the one we pick, like land it and then highlight, like mark, like strike through or whatever the sections that we don't think we should be changing in the doc itself. And then you could easily identify the other sections.
Yeah, I'd love to land a doc like that where we can at least look at the boilerplate, but the strike through signifies we shouldn't be changing it. And we can have Andrew verify that we have the right places with his wiggle room.
An alternative that I want to throw out there really quickly, and please feel free to tell me if people don't agree with this. The majority of people that we're going to have coming and participating here are not lawyers, myself included. And I think that if we start from a base that is legal text, we're going to lose people, their ability to just sit down and take and figure out what's going on. To what Sam identified here is the places where the bylaws differ or where we have control. But also I think there's some really high level I think we could make some bullet points about what the spirit of all of the intent here is. And it's not to say that, that's the end of what our deliverable is, but I kind of feel like people are going to be much more productive working on a higher level document than actual legalese. Does anyone agree or disagree with that?
So I agree with that. And I think Sam has already done a good job diffing where the two, foundations are, the boilerplate language is like not the same. And so we can use what he's already called out as distinctions as maybe like those can be issues that go on, and we discuss issues like the one that Mateo presented, just using those differences first as like the discussion points.
This is Sam. Andrew, do you have some time sometime later this week that you and I can get together and compare approaches and make a joint recommendation?
Absolutely, happy to.
Yeah, from my opinion, I think we actually need both, right? Like if there was the doc where somebody wants to look at the details, they can dive in. It's highlighted so these are boilerplate, don't change. And then where there's discussion about changes, having those at a higher level in a document or separate issues, I think would let you engage at both levels.
I'm willing to do both. Andrew, how do I best reach you?
Email is easiest, just andrew.updegrove@gesmer, GESMER.com.
Can somebody paste that into the chat so I can get it accurately?
I'll put it in right now.
And if the deliverable from that could be like a folder structure in the repo, PR'd in for where we can actively iterate on that, that'd be awesome. I'd also like to call out. I'd also like to call out just for content-wise in the Bootstrap process branch, I captured a lot of the kind of softer recommendations that Miles mentioned, the mission statement, vision, values. It's pretty succinctly captured right there. I just pasted the link in the chat, so feel free to use that.
So as Ben Mitchell just mentioned, we have 2 minutes left on the meeting. I guess a quick one that we can end this particular discussion on, we've got currently 9 days left in the month. Do we feel confident that we can have something that we can deliver to the board of directors within 9 days, or should we let the board of directors know that we need more time?
I'm going to suggest that we need more time.
Seconded.
Thirded.
Okay, so I will take the follow-up on that, and I will go ahead and write the merge group and figure something out. I mean, it's also possible that we adjust the process that we talked about, and maybe it's more of a collaborative process as opposed to a handing things off process. But I'll make sure that message is sent, and I'll open an issue to track that discussion.
Miles, this is Dan. I mean, I'm not speaking, I'm just speaking for myself here, but I kind of feel like we collectively decided that we were going to make this more collaborative rather than waterfall, as you were talking about it. So I think that shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, so that's my sense.
And I agree with you. I just want to make sure that we're explicit about this and we don't leave any threads hanging. So with that being said, thank you everyone for coming to the first meeting. Let's tentatively assume that we'll be meeting at the same time next week. Otherwise we'll kick it back to the issues and we'll figure out a time for next week.
Can we turn that into a calendar item?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Miles, do you want me to PR the minutes in?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm just going to make like a raw, what we captured, and people can review and clean it up after that.
Sounds great. Stopping the stream.